It was a thrill every morning to step out onto that rocky plain, with the early morning sun casting long black shadows to the west, and the various small knolls and hollows revealed clearly. There was usually a wind from the south, and loose fines moved in a sinuous flow over the ground, so that the rocks sometimes seemed to creep. Even the strongest of these winds could scarcely be felt against an outstretched hand. But they hadn't yet experienced one of the storms, one of the storm winds. At 500 kilometers per hour, they were pretty sure to feel something. At 20, nearly nothing. Nadia and Samantha walked over to one of the little rovers that they had uncrated and climbed in. Nadia drove the rover across the plain to a tractor they had found the day before, about a kilometer to the west. The morning cold cut through her walker in a diamond pattern, as a result of the X-weave of the heating filaments in the suit material. A strange sensation, but she had been colder in Siberia many a time, and she had no complaints. Mars is covered in presents. Isn't it adorable? As a result of the X-weave of the heating filaments in the suit material, a strange sensation, but she had been colder in Siberia many a time, and she had no complaints. Nadia's out there like, ooh, a new tractor. They came to the big lander and got out. Nadia picked up a drill with a Phillips screwdriver bit and started dismantling the crate on top of the vehicle. The tractor inside the lander's crate was a Mercedes-Benz. She poked the drill into the head of a screw, pulled the trigger, and watched the screw spin out. She moved to the next, grinning. Innumerable times in her youth, she had gone out in cold like this, with numb, white, chopped-up hands, and fought titanic battles to unscrew frozen or stripped screws. But here, it was zip, another one out. And really, with the walker, it was warmer than it had been in Siberia, and freer than in space. The walker, no more restrictive than a thin, stiff wetsuit. Red rocks were scattered all around in their uncanny regularity. Voices chattered on the common band. Hey, I found those solar panels. You think that's something? I just found the goddamn nuclear reactor. Yes, it was a great morning on Mars. Damn. See, that would have been a great place to end. What the fuck? Now I gotta keep going. Has anyone found the vodka? All right. We can read 3 more pages, and then there's a natural, or not, I don't know, there's a break in the book, so I guess we'll stop there and hope that it's natural. Every day is Christmas in the first year on Mars. Good night. Arcady. Oh yeah, Arcady is king of Phobos right now. And everyone else went to the landers. Oh, no spoilers. Oh my god. The blah blah blah. The nuclear reactor. Yes, it was a great morning on Mars. The stacked crate walls made a ramp to drive the tractor off the lander. They didn't look strong enough, but that was the gravity again. Nadia had turned on the tractor's heating system as soon as she could reach it, and now she climbed into the cab and tapped a command into its autopilot, feeling that it would be best to let the thing descend the ramp on its own, with her and Samantha watching from the side. Just in case the ramp was more brittle in the cold than expected, or otherwise unreliable. She still found it almost impossible to think in terms of Martian G, to trust the designs that took it into account. The ramp just looked too flimsy. But the tractor rolled down without incident and stopped on the ground. 8 meters long, royal blue, with wire mesh wheels, taller than they were. They had to climb a short ladder into the cab. The crane prosthesis was already attached to the mount on the front end, and that made it easy to load the tractor with the winch, the sandbagger, the boxes of spare parts, and finally, the crate walls. When they were done, the tractor looked as overloaded and top-heavy as a steam Calliope. But the G made it really only a matter of balance. The tractor itself was a real pig, with 600 horsepower, a wide wheelbase, and wheels big as tracks. The hydrazine Calliope? I don't know. It looked as overloaded and top-heavy as a steam Calliope. But the G made it only a matter of balance. The tractor itself was a real pig, with 600 horsepower, a wide wheelbase, and wheels big as tracks. The hydrazine motor had picked up even worse than diesel. But it was like the ultimate first gear, completely inexorable. They took off and rolled slowly toward the trailer park. And there she was, Nadezhda Chernyshevsky, driving a Mercedes-Benz across Mars. She followed Samantha to the sorting lot, feeling like a queen. And that was the morning. Back into the habitat, helmet and tank off. A quick bite in Walker and Boots. With all that running around, they were famished. After lunch, they went back out in the Mercedes-Benz and used it to haul a Boeing air miner into an area east of the habitats, where they were going to gather all the factories. The air miners were big metal cylinders, somewhat resembling 737 fuselages, except that they had 8 massive sets of landing gear and rocket engines attached vertically to their sides, and 2 jet engines mounted above the fuselage, fore and aft. 5 of these miners had been dropped in the area some 2 years before. In the time since, their jet engines had been sucking in the thin air and ramming it through a sequence of separating mechanisms to divide it into its component gases. The gases had been compressed and stored in big tanks, and were now available for use. So the Boeings each now held 5,000 liters of water ice, 3,000 liters of liquid oxygen, 3,000 liters of liquid nitrogen, 500 liters of argon, and 400 liters of carbon dioxide. It was no easy task hauling these giants across the rubble to the big holding tanks near their habitats, but they needed to do it. Because after they were drained into the holding tanks, they could be turned on again. Just that afternoon, another group had gotten one emptied out and turned back on, and the low hum of its jets could be heard everywhere, even in a helmet or a habitat. Nadia and Samantha's miner was more stubborn. In the whole afternoon, they had only managed to haul it 100 meters, and they had to use the bulldozer attachment to scrape a rough road for it all the way. Just before sunset, they returned through the lock into the habitat, their hands cold and aching with fatigue. They stripped down to their dust-caked underwear and went straight to the kitchen, ravenous once more. Vlad estimated that they were burning about 6,000 calories a day. They cooked and gulped down rehydrated pasta, nearly scalding their partially thawed fingers on their trays. Only when they had finished eating did they go to the women's changing room and start trying to clean themselves up, sponging down with hot water, changing into clean jumpers. It's going to be hard to keep our clothes clean. That dust even gets through the wrist locks and the waist zippers. Oh, that dust even gets through the wrist locks, and the waist zippers are like open holes. Well, yeah, those fines are micron-sized. We're going to have worse trouble from it than dirty clothes. I can tell you that. It's going to be getting into everything. Our lungs, our blood, our brains. That's life on Mars. This was already a popular refrain, used whenever they encountered a problem, especially an intractable one. On some days after dinner, there were a couple hours of sunlight left, and Nadia, restless, would sometimes go back outside. Brain glitter. It's just brain glitter, guys. Give me some of that Martian brain dust. Give me some lead. Give me some microplastics, please. I call it brain glitter. Anyways, Yeehaw. Yeehaw. Yeehaw, that's life on Mars. On some days after dinner, there were a couple hours of sunlight left, and Nadia, restless, would sometimes go back outside. Often, she spent the time wandering around the crates that had been hauled to base that day. And over time, she assembled a personal toolkit, feeling like a kid in a candy store. Years in the Siberian power industry had given her a reverence for good tools. She had suffered brutally from the lack of them. Everything in North Yakut had been built on permafrost, and the platforms sank unevenly in the summer and were buried in ice in the winter. And parts for construction had come from all over the world. Heavy machinery from Switzerland and Sweden, drills from America, reactors from the Ukraine, plus a lot of old scavenged Soviet stuff. Some of it good, some of it indescribably shoddy. But all of it unmatched. Some of it built in inches, so that they had to improvise constantly, building oil wells out of ice and string, knocking together nuclear reactors that made Chernobyl look like a Swiss watch. And every desperate day's work accomplished with a collection of tools that would have made a tinker weep. Now she could wander in the dim ruby light of sunset, her old jazz collection piped from the Habitat stereo into her helmet headphones as she rooted in supply boxes and picked out any tool she wanted. She could carry them back to the small room she had commandeered in one of the storage warehouses, whistling along with King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band, adding to a collection that included, among other items, an Allen wrench set, some pliers, a power drill, several clamps, some hacksaws, an impact wrench set, a brace of cold-tolerant bungee cords, assorted files and rasps and planes, a crescent wrench set, a crimper, 5 hammers, some hemostats, 3 hydraulic jacks, a bellows, several sets of screwdrivers, drills and bits, a portable compressed gas cylinder, a box of plastic explosives and shape charges, a tape measure, a giant Swiss Army knife. Sorry, I lost my place. A giant Swiss Army knife, tin snips, tongs, tweezers, 3 vices, a wire stripper, X-Acto knives, a pick, a bunch of mallets, a nut driver set, hose clamps, a set of end mills, a set of jeweler's screwdrivers, a magnifying glass, all kinds of tape, a plumber's bob and ream, a sewing kit, scissors, sieves, a lathe, levels of all sizes, long-nosed pliers, vice grip pliers, a tap and die set, 3 shovels, a compressor, a generator, a welding and cutting set, a wheelbarrow. Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my collection's complete? Wouldn't you think I'm the girl who has everything? Okay. I want more. I literally am thinking of The Little Mermaid. Okay. I love Nadia. Blah, 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 blah. And so on. Wow, it's like I wrote this. Indeed, indeed. And so on. And this was just the mechanical equipment. Her carpenter's tools. In other parts of the warehouse, they were stockpiling research and lab equipment, geological tools, and any number of computers and radios and telescopes and video cameras. And the biosphere team had warehouses of equipment to set up the farm, the waste recyclers, the gas exchange mechanism. In essence, their whole infrastructure. And the medical team had more warehouses of supplies for the clinic and their research labs and the genetic engineering facility. You know what this is? Nadia said to Sax Russell one evening, looking around her warehouse. It is an entire town, disassembled and lying in pieces. And a very prosperous town at that. Yes, a university town, with first-rate departments in several sciences. But still in pieces. Yes, but I kind of like it that way. Sunset was mandatory return to habitat time. And in the dusk, she would stumble into the lock and inside, and eat another small cold meal sitting on her bed, listening to the talk around her, which mostly concerned the day's work and the arrangement of the task for the next morning. Frank and Maya were supposed to be doing this. But in fact, it was happening spontaneously, in a kind of ad hoc barter system. Hiroko was particularly good at it, which was a surprise given how withdrawn she had been on the voyage out. But now that she needed help from outside her team, she spent most of every evening moving from person to person, so single-minded and persuasive that she usually had a sizable crew working on the farm every morning. Nadia couldn't really see this. They had 5 years of dehydrated and canned food on hand. Fare that suited Nadia fine. She had eaten worse for most of her life, and she paid little attention to food anymore. She might as well have been eating hay, or refueling like one of the tractors. But they did need farm for growing bamboo. Which Nadia planned to use as a construction material in the permanent habitat that she hoped to start building soon. It all interlocked. All of their tasks were linked together, were necessary to each other. So when Hiroko plopped down beside her, she said, Yeah, be there at 8. But you can't build a permanent farm until the base habitat itself is built. So you really ought to be helping me tomorrow, all right? No, Hiroko said, laughing. Day after, okay? Hiroko's main competition for labor came from Sax Russell and his crowd, who were working to start all the factories. Vlad and Ursula and the Biomed group were also hungry to get all their labs set up and running. These three teams seemed willing to live in the trailer park indefinitely, as long as their own projects were progressing. But luckily, there were a lot of people who were not so obsessed by their work. People like Maya and John, and the rest of the cosmonauts, who were interested in moving on to larger and better protected quarters as soon as possible. So, Nadia's project would get help from them. When she was done eating, Nadia took her tray into the kitchen and cleaned it with a little swab, then went over to sit by Anne Claiborne and Simon Fraser and the rest of the geologists. I'm almost done. Anne looked nearly asleep. She was spending her mornings taking long rover trips and hikes, and then working hard on the base all afternoon, trying to make up for her trips away. To Nadia, she seemed strangely tense, less happy about being on Mars than she would have thought. She appeared unwilling to work on the factories or for Hiroko. Indeed, she usually came to work for Nadia, who, since she was only trying to build housing, could be said to be impacting the planet less than the more ambitious teams. Oh, that's who Anne is. Anne is the one who's like, we can't terraform Mars without the proper authority, and we have to be really careful because we don't want to disturb the Martian ecosystem. And everyone else is like, shut up, hippie. Poor Anne, she's so depressed. Okay, to Nadia, she was strangely tense, less happy about being on Mars than one would have thought. She appeared unwilling to work on the factories or for Hiroko. Indeed, she usually came to work for Nadia, who, since she was only trying to build housing, could be said to be impacting the planet less than the more ambitious teams. Maybe that was it. Maybe it was not. Anne wasn't saying. She was hard to know. Moody. Not in Maya's extravagant Russian manner, but more subtly. And, Nadia thought, in a darker register. In Bessie Smith land. All around them, people cleaned up after dinner. Am I the only one wondering if the author will address environmental concerns in the context of Martian colonization? Shut up, hippie. You're literally Anne. That's the character, yes. And we've only read this much of it already. Welcome. Nerd. No, but that's what Anne cares about. That's why she's like, or, you know, we don't really know. She's kind of moody, but she's also like the environmentalist. Not in Maya's extravagant Russian manner, but more subtly, and Nadia thought, in a darker register, in Bessie Smith land. All around them, people cleaned up after dinner and talked, and looked over manifests and talked, and bunched around computer terminals and talked, and washed clothes and talked, until most were stretched out on their beds, talking in lower voices, until they passed out. It's like the first second of the universe, Sax Russell observed, rubbing his face wearily. It's like the first second of the universe. All crammed together and no differentiation. Just a bunch of hot particles rushing about. And that was just one day. And that was what it was like every day. For day after day after day. See, it wasn't a natural break. I had to add that last part, okay? That's what it was like every day. The end. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, nerds. Couldn't do it without you.